is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Donald Trump needs a weak dollar.
Have we achieved a soft landing? Has the Fed kind of done its job?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Fears over a broader regional war in the Middle East.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, and Lisa Mateo, a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. We welcome all of you across the nation on a news day, Paul, we did not anticipate, but 9, 10, 11 years ago. Today, the funeral service at the National Cathedral for James Earl Carter. Our Anne-Marie Horton and David Gura are there. We had these horrific fires. Rob Carroll and Paul Sweeney to join us here in moments.
Yeah, Tom, at this time yesterday, there were 3 fires reported in Los Angeles. Now, 24 hours later, there are 6. So this situation is getting even more dire for our good friends in Los Angeles.
The Washington Post with a fabulous wind map of Los Angeles this morning. And the gusts, not as fearsome as yesterday, but nevertheless complex and still quite large in Los Angeles. For those in the market, we are closed today. We are never closed. Ed Yardeni will be with us in moments. Right now, with the Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we have a pretty quiet morning of futures before all activity, like you said, closes for the funeral of former President Jimmy Carter. We'll start with NASDAQ futures down about 0.2%, 57 points. Dow futures down about 32. S&P futures down about 11. The bond market closes early, 2 p.m. Wall Street time today. Right now, the 2-year yield 4.26%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.66%, and that's down 2 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is up about 0.1%. The pound actually slumped below 123, its weakest level against the dollar since November 2023. Right now, the British pound down about 0.6% at 122.88 against the dollar. And chip stocks, they could be under pressure when trading resumes tomorrow. That's after sources say President Biden plans to further limit AI chip exports. After the bell yesterday, shares of NVIDIA actually dropped more than 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Elisa, thanks so much, and thank you for mentioning the United Kingdom. We are thrilled to bring you Jordan Rochester of Mizuho. The United Kingdom really in crisis. That was nicely done by Kriti here moments ago, Kriti Gupta in London, but it's off the U.S. radar. It is not off the radar of Europe and the United Kingdom, where prices are lower and yields sharply higher as well. He was wonderful yesterday in giving us perspective on this fire. Rob Carroll continues his coverage this morning, our Bloomberg meteorologist. Rob, the Washington Post wind gust chart shows an immensely complex Santa Ana winds. Give us some simplicity now. What are you watching this morning?
Well, watching another pulse of wind that's going to develop during the day, Tom. Right now, we're at the coolest part of the day, so an inversion has developed out there. What that's done is the cool air is close to the ground, the warmer air off the deck, so the winds have become lighter throughout the L.A. basin. We're seeing gusts now in just a few spots up over 22 miles an hour. That's about it. What will happen is once the sun comes up, we break the inversion, the wind will start to mix down from the surface, from the loft to the surface, and we'll start to see the gusts come back up by midday. They won't be as strong as yesterday in the L.A. area. We'll see some gusts over 40, 45 miles an hour this afternoon, and they'll shift southward into San Diego County. That's where the problems are going to start to develop. They'll move out of Orange and L.A. County and down into San Diego County this afternoon. Much of the localized L.A. basin under a wind advisory and a red flag warning today, but now those wind advisories extend all the way down to San Diego through 2 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. So I think we'll see continuation of the problems outside of L.A. today. We may see some new problems develop, though, across parts of San Diego County.
This came up at the dining room table last night. I believe the winds are east to west out over the Pacific goes the smoke. Does it then turn around, and do we have the haze of the LA fires across the western states?
It doesn't look like it right now. Yesterday's plumes, Tom, were passing south of Catalina and then kind of recurving out over the Pacific and dispersing. There may be some smoke. I'm actually seeing some in reports this morning to areas well to the north and west right now of the L.A. area. It looks like Van Nuys is reporting visibility 10 miles in smoke. So there is some localized smoke well to the northwest of Los Angeles. That may continue today. The good news is after Friday, the winds are going to become much, much lighter this weekend. The pressure gradient's not going to be as strong, and hopefully they're going to be able to fight these fires. One of the pluses about the lighter winds this morning is they've been able to use the helicopters to do water drops directly over the fire. That was something they were having difficulty doing yesterday because of the high winds.
Rob, is there any precipitation at all in the forecast?
No, there's not, Paul. Again, we're in a La Nina pattern, so the storm track is north of Northern California. The guidance that's been coming in the last couple of days has been showing precipitation moving through the Pacific Northwest and as far south as Northern California, but that's been about it. As I'm looking at the latest guidance right now, another system goes through the Pacific Northwest over the weekend. It shows very little in the way of precipitation right through next weekend over Southern California.
Rob, thank you for your time. Rob Carolyn with us, and will continue to be with us across all of Bloomberg Radio, our surveillance meteorologist. Futures are open, as Lisa mentioned. No trading today. Was a wait to the tape. Futures negative 11. In the VIX, I don't know what to make of it at 18.12. A treat on this special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. Ed Yardeni for an extended conversation. Ed, I read your note carefully yesterday, folks. I can't say enough about the value of subscribing to Yardeni's quick takes. You assessed the bond market. Should people that own shares be afraid of higher yields?
I think they should be concerned, but all in all, I think bond yields have normalized. I think that's important to keep that in mind. They were abnormally low between the great financial crisis and the great virus crisis because the Fed was manipulating rates. It was rigging the bond market with the short-term rate, the federal funds rate, being down to zero, and then, of course, quantitative easing. Now the bond market has been sort of liberated, free to tell us what the supply and demand in the credit markets really is. And I think we're back to where we were before the great financial crisis when bond yields ranged between 4 and 5%. So I don't think we should freak out about that. I think we should actually welcome it because it's a sign that the economy is doing just quite well.
You think, Paul, there's 4 people on the planet that agree with Dr. Yardeni?
So, Ed, I mean, given that backdrop, I mean, how do you think this Federal Reserve is going to proceed for the remainder of 2025?
Well, it's interesting. You know, the Fed just won't listen to me. I don't understand why. I don't understand why. But back in August of last year, we were saying, my colleague Eric Wallerstein and I were saying that the economy is resilient, it's strong, it's demonstrated that it could withstand a tightening of monetary policy. And again, I think the Fed not only tightened the monetary policy when they took the Fed funds rate from 0 to 5.5% between 2022 and 2023. I think they also normalized interest rates. Both the federal funds rate and the bond yield are kind of back to normal. So in August, we thought there was no need for the Fed to act, but they didn't listen. So they did not just 25 basis points, they did 50 basis points on September 18th. And we argued that that would probably lead to higher bond yields. And that's exactly what's happened. We've had the Fed funds rate down 100 basis points.
This is brilliant. Paul, I can't say enough about this. Overnight on LinkedIn, Paul Donovan of UBS, and he'll be with us, folks, in the coming days, like Dr. Yardeni, was collegially scathing about a Fed and the recent decisions.
Exactly. So, Ed, I mean, how are you...
Let me just answer your question. The bottom line is, I think they're definitely on pause. That's the message we're getting from the Fed, and I think it may be none and done, or maybe 1 or 2 and done. But I think the Fed doesn't have to lower interest rates anymore.
As we just complete 2 years, 2023, 2024, of north of 20% returns in the S&P 500 index, Ed, how do you think about 2025 stocks, bonds, all that kind of stuff? How are you talking to your clients this year?
Well, technical terms, roaring 2020s, baby.
Yep.
I mean, so far so good. Back in 2019, we suggested that the decade ahead, the 2020s, could be the roaring 2020s. We noticed that there was a shortage of labor, skilled labor especially, and that there was a tremendous plethora of technological innovations that were actually useful, that actually work and are relatively inexpensive to implement. and that these technologies would lead to a productivity growth boom. We've had them before. This one seems to be much more sustainable and potentially much more significant.
Ed Yardeni with us, folks. A special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. We're with you till 9 o'clock, where Anne-Marie Horton and David Gura will join from Washington with the services at the National Cathedral for James Earl Carter. Thrilled that Anne-Marie Horton and David Gura will give us their perspective on that. We are thrilled as well to give you Ed Yardeni this morning. I can't say enough about in October of, I think it was 2 years ago, Ed Yardeni, and Ed, I'm going to give credit to the great technician, Ralph Ancompor as well, said climb on board equities.
My friend,
yeah. You maintain your enthusiasm, Dr. Yardeni. I looked at the lineup of hedge fund performance, and everybody hedged last year. Very few people were full Yardeni. Describe full Yardeni.
Well, full Yardeni right now is stay invested. It's hard for me to tell people who've been in cash to jump in here because the market isn't cheap. But if you've been fully invested, particularly in technology, communication services, industrials, financials, which is the sectors we favored, we would actually stay with them. I know they're not cheap, but on the other hand, their earnings outlook is really quite good. For the current year, we have $285 a share for the S&P 500. That beats all the other strategists on the street, and that's consistent with the Roaring 2020s idea of a productivity-led economic boom.
Ed, it seems like for 2025, given where the Fed is, i.e. probably a little bit, maybe a couple of cuts at most for 2025, it sounds like it's a year where earnings really have to push this market higher. Earnings have to come through. Do you have concerns about some of the earnings estimates out there for this market?
Well, look, not only does the Fed not listen to me, but the market doesn't listen to me. I would love to have a nice, civilized, gradual bull market from here that's driven just by earnings and not valuations. Valuations are not cheap. The Buffett ratio is at an all-time record high. The forward PE is around 22. Back right before the tech wreck of 2000, it was 25, so we're not far from that. I mean, information technology and communication services account for a whopping 40% of the S&P 500, and we know that 30% of the S&P 500 is the Magnificent Seven. Look, I don't think these stocks the Magnificent Seven are going to go away. I think they're here to stay. I think they're going to continue to account for high valuation multiple. I think they're going to continue to outperform, but I'm also counting on the S&P 493 to do well. So my year-end target is 7,000 on the S&P 500, which I think can be driven mostly up by earnings.
Tell us about the linkage here of nominal GDP into revenue, which supports your earnings call, the margin call, the development of free cash flow. Do we have a buoyancy of 5% nominal GDP sustained?
I think so. I think, again, consistent with the Roaring 2020s scenario, I think that productivity, which is currently quadrupled from 0.5% at an annual rate on a 5-year trailing basis, it was 0.5% back at the end of 2015, and now we're at 2%. So we've already seen a significant productivity growth boom, but 2% is kind of average for the historical average. So what we're counting on is productivity to do a bit better than that, maybe 3.5, even 4%, which to some people might sound delusional, but if you look at previous productivity growth booms, that's what we got to. And we think we're going to get to that handily by the end of the decade because of the technologies that are available out there. I think 3% growth is kind of what we're at right now, maybe a little less than that on a year-over-year basis. 3.5 to 4% real GDP is possible. Add 2% inflation, and you get 5 to 6% nominal GDP.
I can't emphasize enough, Paul, how alone Yardeni is on this. There's some bulls out there. John Stolfus.
I'm alone, but I don't feel lonely.
You don't feel lonely, but the idea that we're going to sustain 3% real GDP, how many guests are telling us that? It's a pretty lone call.
Exactly. Hey, Ed, what are you suggesting folks do in the fixed income market? Because a lot of folks feel pretty comfortable at 4.25% in 2-year Treasury. Do they need to take credit risk?
They don't really need to take credit risk, and I welcome that. I think that's, again, normalization. We should have an economy where if investors don't want to take risk, they shouldn't be punished with 0 to 2% yields on their money market funds. I think they should be getting a reasonable return, and 4.5% is certainly a reasonable return on a 2-year. On the other hand, people who want to lock it in can certainly go for the 4.5 and higher percents that are available in the capital markets. So you don't have to take risk, but there's greater reward, obviously, if you're willing to go extend into the bond market, go into the corporates, maybe even into the high yields.
Ed Yardeni, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it this morning. Edward Yardeni there with a call of 7,000 XPX. I didn't, in my head, I'm sorry, I can't extrapolate on the Dow Jones industrial average, but it's a big number. There's my scientific
I love the Ed
analysis.
Yardeni CV, Tom. Chief economist is C.J. Lawrence, Prudential Beige Securities, and E.F. Hutton. I mean, just monster names.
Do you
on Global Wall
realize,
Street from the back of
we
the day.
have 42 people that listen to us each and every morning, and 3 of them know Prudential Beige.
Yep, exactly.
Or how sad is it that most of America doesn't know what E.F. Hutton is?
Yep.
I mean, they expanded retail in a unique
exactly.
Well, it was a joy to talk to George Ball here recently
Yep.
with all the challenges that he and E.F. Hutton had. A special edition, a more somber edition of Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. Somber because of fires in Los Angeles and ceremonies, a service at the National Cathedral at 10 a.m. this morning for former President Carter. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Tom, Paul, Lisa, thank you very much. Wildfires driven by hurricane-strength winds are burning across Los Angeles. The fires have destroyed homes and businesses and prompted evacuation orders in densely populated areas, including major landmarks. Pasadena Mayor Victor Gordo says they toured the areas ravaged by the fire.
To date, we have over 100,000 people under mandatory evacuation. We've had 5 fatalities, and then we have close to another 100,000 people who have been warned to evacuate because they are in a danger zone.
Mayor Gordo called it a tremendous tragedy in the community. Hundreds of firefighters in Los Angeles continue to battle several major wildfires in the area, including the Pacific Palisades fire. This man is inside one of the damaged neighborhoods inside the Palisades and says he's been feeling helpless watching the fires engulf the neighborhood and being unable to stop it.
There's just nothing that we can do. You know, we would love to help out, but at this point there's nothing we can do, and we're just really feeling for them.
The disaster is expected to become one of the most costly in U.S. history, with estimated damages and economic losses ranging from $52 billion to $57 billion. Today is the state funeral for former President Jimmy Carter. President Biden will give a eulogy at the service at Washington National Cathedral this morning. Terry Haynes, founder of Pangea Policy, spoke to Bloomberg.
This is a man who wanted to live a useful life, and he achieved that, not just with the presidency, but with the Carter Center, with Habitat for Humanity, and a great deal more.
Terry Haynes, founder of Pangea Policy. Schools and cities from Texas to Georgia are shutting down in anticipation of freezing rain and snow forecast for much of the southern U.S. The severe weather is expected to cross a stretch from New Mexico to Alabama. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. The fires that we've seen have just been, I think we're all riveted by it. Michael Barr, your thoughts on what we've seen in Los Angeles, please?
My Lord, I have never seen seen any, and we're talking the second largest city in the United States of America, and you throw in
the size of it.
Yes,
I did not realize you could take Los Angeles County, I believe. You could take Delaware and some other small state, Rhode Island.
Yeah.
And they fit inside L.A. County.
You throw the hurricane winds in, and that fire is burning 3 football fields a minute.
Yeah.
Wow.
Caitlin Collins over at CNN last night talking. And Paul, this is a New York City story. Melissa Rivers, the daughter of Joan Rivers, who we lost way, way too early. They lost their house. Melissa Rivers saying, quote, "She grabbed the necessities in my mom's Emmy, a photo of my dad, and a drawing my mother had done of me and my son." Melissa Rivers there. And you mentioned earlier Billy Crystal lost his
Billy
property as
Crystal,
well.
Ricky Lake, James Woods,
Paris Hilton. Yeah, and there'll be more coming in. And among, I think we're up to like well over 1,000 properties, Paul, right?
Yeah, it's just been extraordinary. And again, I just
We
kinda
don't
think
know
about-
is the answer.
Yeah, and Rob Caroline was reporting earlier, the winds abating a little bit, but potentially could pick up going forward. So I still, and no precipitation in the forecast,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Jim Glassman scheduled to be with us. He lives in Los Angeles. We will look to Jobs Day tomorrow, but with Dr. Glassman, we'll also get his perspective on what he's seen the last 48 hours. Please stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Trade over 10,000 U.S. stocks and ETFs, U.S. equity index options, U.S. treasuries, and more on your timetable. Learn more at ibkr.com/around-the-clock. All right, we have futures lower this morning. This is before the stock market closes to reflect on the life of former President Jimmy Carter this morning. NASDAQ futures down 0.3%, 65 points. Dow futures down 0.1%, 51 points. S&P futures down 0.2% or 14 points. Treasuries end a 4-day sell-off. Keep in mind, bond market closes at 2 p.m. Wall Street time today. We have the two-year yield at 4.26%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.66%, and that's down 3 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little changed. We had some more Fed speak. Susan Collins says she favors fewer Fed cuts in 2025 than she had anticipated just a few months ago. And finally, a few companies making news. Spark Group, it's the operator of fashion brands like Eddie Bauer, Aeropostale, Forever 21. They have merged with JCPenney. They're going to form a new company called Catalyst Brands. And SoftBank Arm exploring a deal to acquire Ampere Computing. And finally, Meta saying it's going to allow some Facebook users to view eBay listings on its marketplace service. And that's because it's trying to resolve that European Union charge of illegally shutting out competition. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. It is 4:25 a.m. in Los Angeles. Some imagery. We may lose this, but for those of you on Bloomberg Radio, we give this to YouTube. Good morning out on YouTube. And really extraordinary. And the key thing here, Paul, is the flames go straight up because Rob Caroline says wind is at its lightest this moment.
Right, and the good news is then presumably the helicopters and other...
They'll be able to get the water
Yeah,
out.
get the water. I've seen some amazing video of that already. So hopefully that can help in the effort here. So, but again, the video here, and again, it's still, darkness over Southern California. So the video we're getting is just showing kind of just this glow and the aura of these fires that are just... and again, now 6 of them located in Los Angeles County.
Try to give you expert perspective on this through the day, and certainly this is not going to go away. Mr. Caroline suggesting moving south as well today. Futures are trading in a market that will not open. Futures have a weight to the tape. I want to digress here. We've got Jordan Rochester. Rich, when is Jordan Rochester on our date calendar?
Later this morning.
The 8 o'clock hour?
7:41.
Okay.
Wall Street time.
We're juggling schedule here today. And I really can't say enough about what's going on in the United Kingdom. Jordan Rochester to join us there on a modest yield panic. This was the first name I asked for on James Earl Carter. If you come out of Oberlin, you get parchment from Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar.
That's
the
pretty
first
solid.
thing you do is sit in the mailroom in the bottom of the Pentagon and open mail. Richard Haass did this for Jimmy Carter in 1979. What was it like, Ambassador Haass, to be a young buck at the Department of Defense as Jimmy Carter turned Washington upside down?
Like, on one hand, Tom, it was an unbelievable opportunity. I had just finished working on my doctorate, where I was writing about what was called East of Suez, what we would call the Persian Gulf and the like. And in '79, the two biggest crises happened to be in Iran and Afghanistan. So there I was in my late 20s, and suddenly I was getting invited to meetings with the Secretary of Defense and others. It was crazy. But I also learned the limits of my role. At one point, I was pressing a lieutenant colonel to allow me and some other civilians in on the details of the contingency planning for what we might do in that part of the world. And he sat me down and he said, "Son, you're here for another year or two? I'm here for my whole career. You're what we call Christmas help. No way let you see these plans."
Was President Carter Christmas help? E.J. Dion in the Post this morning with an essay on a one-term president. When was it the hostage crisis which you lived directly that ended the presidency, or was it more than that, to that landslide Reagan victory?
I think it was more than that. Though Carter himself thought if he had maybe ordered one more helicopter to Desert One and we had rescued the hostages, he might well have been reelected. Well, it's one of the many things we'll never know. But I think it was more than that. Carter was not a good communicator. There was a little bit of an eat your vegetables quality to his presidency. He was telling us maybe at times, Tom, what we needed to hear, but we certainly didn't want to hear, whether it was about the energy crisis and so forth. But the actual accomplishments of the administration were many. What also, though, probably did him in was high double-digit inflation. You really can't survive that politically. But that said, he accomplished more in one term than most presidents do in two.
Richard, given the hindsight that we do now have, the perspective that we do now have, from your perspective, what do you think the Carter legacy is?
I think it's pretty impressive. I mean, if you think about it, and I'll focus on foreign policy, it was an interesting mixture of idealism and realism. He put human rights squarely on the foreign policy agenda, something that Reagan obviously continued, but he also negotiated arms control agreements with Soviet Union. He normalized relations with communist China. He was a realist about what the United States had to accept in terms of the nationalism and rights of others. So he returned the Panama Canal, by the way, on terms that have allowed us to use it ever since. He wasn't a pacifist, but he was a great believer in peace. He negotiated the Camp David agreements, the Egypt-Egyptian peace treaty. So I think he'll be seen as a president who got an awful lot done in 4 years.
Ambassador, when you were at the Council on Foreign Relations, let me make clear, with Centerview Partners now, and I'm going to say emeritus at Council on Foreign Relations, as he built the modern institution, you had the advantage of Shannon O'Neill and others with terrific Latin coverage. Does President Trump want to move us back to Hey Bruno Vanilla Treaty of 1903 with Panama? I mean, I get Greenland as a joke. Panama's not a joke after September 7th, 1977. Does he simply want to move us back to a treaty of 1903?
Tom, I don't take this as a joke, and I'm not sure what his motives are, who spoke to him, because these issues were not raised during the campaign. But I think it's unfortunate in terms of the hemisphere. I also think it communicates the larger point that major powers have the right to do what they want in their own neighborhoods, which is music to the ears of Russia and Ukraine and China dealing with the South China Sea and Taiwan. So again, if we have serious concerns about Mexico or Canada or the canal, there's something called diplomacy. and use your diplomats and raise these issues. But don't walk around the region as though you're entitled, because again, that sets it not only puts everybody in the region and alienates them, but it also sends a terrible message to Russia and China and others that this is now an acceptable way of doing business.
Richard, in terms of foreign relations, what do you expect the first 100 days of this incoming Trump administration? Where do you think the focus will be?
I think it's got to be on Ukraine as much as anything. And then secondly, what I'm hoping it is, and I just wrote a long piece on it, is Iran. And in terms of Ukraine, it's got to be coming to a real meeting of the minds with Mr. Zelensky, and then presenting essentially an approach to Putin, putting pressure on Putin to accept the ceasefire. And then with Iran, we inherit a situation where Iran's on its heels. And what I've been advocating for is the United States should offer a grand bargain to Iran. Get out of the business of military support for proxies, get out of the nuclear weapons business, and we'll ease sanctions so this regime of yours can survive. And that's a big approach, but I hope we take it.
Ambassador Haass, thank you so much for perspective on Jimmy Carter. Richard Haass, of course, with Centerview Partners and always associated with the Council on Foreign Relations. There is no trading today. The market's closed as well. I'm looking. Thank you, David Gura, for sending me the program at the National Cathedral today. The Carters made very clear they wanted a service at the National Cathedral. We've had many formal funeral services for presidents there. Really, memorial services with a cathedral built about 1903, 1905, going back to President Harding. So this is not an unusual moment. Extraordinary the music presence that will be there today. The United States Marine Chamber Orchestra, among others, will play. There will be a pianist playing, individual pianist. Of course, the organ, the great organ that they have there with Edward Nasser, will play as well. But this will be a full service, and that will be the heritage that we've seen from other presidents.
Yeah, it's going to be a phenomenal ceremony, as you would expect. And again, this National Cathedral has hosted many funeral services for many presidents over the years, a rich history, and it should be quite the spectacle today. The
tributes this morning that you will see are Jason Carter, the grandson of the president, and also the Honorable Stuart Eisenstadt. That is wonderful. He has been a fierce defender of the Carter legacy as the former White House domestic affairs advisor for the president, Stuart Eisenstadt, to give a tribute at the cathedral. Anne-Marie Horton and David Gura will have coverage from Washington. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons to follow. This is a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures lower. This is ahead of the closure of the U.S. stock market today to mark the death of Jimmy Carter. Right now, NASDAQ futures down 0.3%, 68 points. Dow futures down 0.1%, 53 points. S&P futures off 0.2%, 14 points. Treasuries on the rise. This is over signs of investor demand returning for global bonds. Keep in mind, the bond market does close at 2 p.m. Wall Street time. We have the 2-year yield, 4.26%. That's down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year near 4.65%. That's down 3 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.1%, and we have Bitcoin at just above 93,000. The only piece of economic data out today, U.S. job cuts today. Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. It actually rose 11.4% year over year in December with 38,792 announcements. Auto companies, well, they had a 43.2% increase from last year. But tomorrow, the big show, we have the U.S. jobs report, and that's followed by that read on sentiment from the University of Michigan. The big show, yes. Not surveillance, the jobs report. There you go. The big show. There you go. Companies making news. I want to start with UBS because sources are telling the Wall Street Journal that it's set to pay at least hundreds of millions of dollars to settle violations by Credit Suisse. Now, this is part of an earlier agreement with the DOJ over American clients who evaded tax. That is your Bloomberg Business Report. To Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. Look for Lisa Mateo tomorrow on the big show.
Exactly.
As well.
In lights.
I knew that we had him scheduled. It was wrapped around English Premier football and all that. But what timing, folks. Blistering and on fire today on LinkedIn was Jordan Rochester of Mizuho. We're thrilled that he's scheduled in right now. It's off our radar in America, but there is a major story in the United Kingdom is their fiscal policy and their gilt market, their bond market, unravel. Jordan Rochester, let's just start with the simplicities. You are heated that this is not a Liz Truss redux. This is not a crisis of political confidence. It's a budget failure. Discuss that.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. Well, it isn't like 2022 with Liz Truss because you don't have unfunded pledges by this chancellor. It was a bit of a different setup. You had even members of the Treasury and the civil service being let go during that period and no OBR forecast. We were operating in the dark of uncertainty when that budget was done. This time round, Tom, what's different is the sell-off is very much a UK story. The gilts are underperforming the US Treasuries, but it's been driven really by global factors. We've had natural gas prices really spiking higher in December, boosting inflation expectations in the UK, and that's leading us to a very difficult place for the front end of the UK curve. We were looking for the UK curve to start to price in more cuts, but what we've actually been seeing is less cuts being priced in, and for the longer end of the curve, what that means, Tom, is low growth expectations, but you've got pretty much a bit of a buyer's strike in UK gilts, and I think that's been part of the story has been driven by all the headlines yesterday talking about how she's breached her fiscal rules, and that's because of the sell-off in rates itself.
Javier Blas of Bloomberg out with a brilliant short note this morning talking about the constraint, the tightness of utilities in the United Kingdom. Paul, John Farrow has been brilliant on this. I just can't, it's totally different, folks, than America, and they face a real tight utility market in their cold of this January. Jordan Rochester, you mentioned there that the bond market unravels. The solution always is currency. Dare I say cable parity?
I think that's a bit too far a stretch, Tom, parity, but we're looking for cable to at least sell off another 1% to 2% in the short term to 121. I think for us to talk about the 2022 levels, remember we got to 105, 104.50 when Liz Truss was at her peak of the market fear. We didn't get to parity then in cable. And to get to parity, you need natural gas to do the exact same again. Because what drove us to get to those levels, Tom, was a balance of payments crisis. The UK is going through a much more milder version of that. But it's all very possible if we get to next winter and the gas situation hasn't gotten any better. Tom, we could be talking about sky-high prices in gas and a much weaker euro and a much weaker sterling. And parity is possible if all the things that go wrong in that sort of timeline.
Jordan, talk to us about the concerns about the deficit in the UK. So we think about the pound dropping to a more than 1 year low, stocks falling, gilts extend a fourth day of rallies. Talk to us about the concern in the marketplace about the UK deficit.
Indeed, there was even a time where a Labour government, the market thought would lead to positive growth and lead to higher growth expectations in the UK. But what the budget did was raise taxes on firms and especially at the lower end of the market, lowering thresholds that when you start paying taxes for part-time workers through national insurance. This is going to really weigh on the employment expectations for the UK. And indeed, the surveys we track suggest a big drop in employment intentions for this year. the part of the budget where she spent more money was in the healthcare sector, the NHS, and in government departmental budgets, the most unproductive parts of the economy. So the fiscal multipliers are very limited, and it took her to the limits of her fiscal rules, which she set herself, which stops her borrowing anymore. So when you hit those rules, the only way to please the market is to cut spending. So what we're looking at is a combination of lower growth expectations, lower employment expectations, and a chancellor who might have to cut spending even more. And that leads to a more negative UK outlook for growth.
Well, it's interesting. I'm just looking at some of the Bloomberg reporting. The UK still has lower debt than US, France, Italy, and Japan. Yet investors continue to be, are they overly concerned about this UK economy, do you think?
I think you've still got the structural challenges of how we deal with the sort of geopolitics post-Brexit. The UK still hasn't particularly recovered from that. It's not the same as the US. It's not the reserve currency of the world. So when you do get periods of emerging market-like correlations, like we're seeing today, the foreign exchange down, but the rates markets should be pushing it higher because of higher yields. So because of that combination of uncertainty on the politics, lack of investment from abroad, that foreign direct investment flows are negative on net in the UK, it's still a large concern, I think.
Jordan, I got to leave it there, but don't be a stranger. I want to talk to you about R&G here, frankly. I want to talk about the heart of the matter, which is a guesstimate of what the growth rate is for the United Kingdom or for America as well. Jordan Rochester with Mizuho, thrilled he could join us, and I hope he's in New York soon.
Yep.
We'll get him in here for 2 hours. He'll bring a saxophone.
Well, I think we go over to the Ned, set up court there, Tom.
We should set up court at Queen Victoria Street. I can see it.
Yep.
You know, there's a bar, Michael Bar, right over by the Tower of London that plays NFL football on the weekends. I've enjoyed, I quaffed a beverage there, watching at the time the Patriots play, when the Patriots were worth watching. With our news in New York City, Michael Bar.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. And we begin with the deadly, out-of-control wildfires in California. At least 5 people are dead and thousands are out of their homes. Let's get the very latest with Bloomberg's John Tucker.
Los Angeles has plunged into its worst natural disaster in decades.
One of the worst I have ever seen, if not the worst.
Los Angeles Fire Captain Eric Scott. A new wildfire flared and slowly expanded in the Hollywood Hills, fed by hurricane-force winds. Some residents tried in vain to fight back.
The balcony was on fire, and I went around the back to grab the garden hose.
For a brief period, winds died down. Crews took advantage of the window to attack the fire from the air. There are currently 5 fires burning across Los Angeles. Over 100,000 residents have been forced to flee. The evacuation area includes landmarks like the TCL Chinese Theater and the Dolby Theater, the home of the Academy Awards. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass.
To those who fled their homes, especially those who have lost your homes, our hearts are breaking for you, and we stand with you.
Not since the 1994 Northridge earthquake has a disaster affected so many lives across the city at once. I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
Today is the state funeral for former President Jimmy Carter. President Biden will give a eulogy at the service at Washington National Cathedral this morning. We'll carry it live here on Bloomberg with coverage starting at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Ukraine's leader made a plea to press on with support for his war effort 11 days before the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump, who has pledged a swift end to the fighting. President Volodymyr Zelensky, during a meeting of allied defense ministers at Ramstein Air Base in Germany today, thanked the outgoing Biden administration for supporting Ukraine in their fight against Russia.
We've shown that when we come and belong together, no one is too small to make a real impact on history.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr mentions that the president will speak at the services today for former President Carter. The homily, and this is totally appropriate, will be Andrew Young of Georgia, former United States ambassador to the United Nations. Andrew Young will give the homily at the service, and I should point out as well, singing John Lennon's Imagine will be Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood.
Perfect. Excellent.
For our president that I think did more for music than any other modern president.
The Allman Brothers.
Yeah, as well. Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood will sing Imagine. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines on Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, and Lisa Mateo.
Your daily look at the front pages around the world, the Lisa Mateo Hour. It's brought to you by IBKR. With Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader, you can trade your views on key political, economic, and climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started today. Thank you, IBKR, for foundational support. And Lisa, you start with something many Americans are living right now.
Yeah, we've been talking about the wildfires. Now Airbnb, they're saying that they're going to be offering free temporary housing to those affected.
Oh, that's good.
So yeah, we've heard about it before. They do it through group 211 LA. It's a nonprofit in Los Angeles. But Airbnb.org, they've been providing these free temporary housing. They did it for the Spain floods back in October 2024, Southern California wildfire in September of last year, and also those affected by the hurricanes. So a lot of hosts open up their home for a discount, and then this website is a place where people can donate, so then that covers the rest of the cost, so that it offers these people, some housing. So
huge deal in
most definitely
in LA now, and many people moving south to San Diego. Their reach is huge here, even with Rob Carolyn saying the storm moves to the south. What else do you have this morning?
Sure. This was a Bloomberg survey. We've been talking so much about how AI could take away jobs. So now this survey from Bloomberg Intelligence, it kind of puts it into perspective. It says global banks, they could cut as many as 200,000 jobs in the next 3 to 5 years. That's about 3% of the industry's global workforce. Back office, middle office, operations, those are the ones most at risk. But it could also mean improved earnings, which they also point out, because banks could add as much as $180 billion to their combined by 2027.
Right from the get-go, they've talked about margin expansion. I'm in the camp, Paul. I'm going to wait until I see it.
Right. But this was a nice survey. Bloomberg Intelligence senior banks analyst Tomas Netzel over in London. He did this survey of a lot of big financial institutions over there. Got some good feedback. So again, putting some numbers on what
they did, and they showed Citigroup already letting staffers use Gen AI to scan through documents. At Klarna, they have AI assistants doing the work of 700 full-time customer service.
Well, as a lowly investment banker, one of my jobs, we spent many nights at the printer, literally the printer in Lower Manhattan, proofreading prospectuses, sitting there till 4 in the morning, proofreading prospectuses. God, you got to automate that somehow with AI.
No, it's serious stuff. And of course, that's where Paul was calling up, doing some, trades out front of the transaction. And actually, that was an issue.
It was.
On insider trading way back. This next one, Lisa, I'm sorry, this got a huge splash by Bloomberg.
It did. Okay, so this is when you kind of tie it in. So what do Wall Street workers do when they're out of work? Because they've been showing there's a 30% reduction in equity analysts at major banks. So what some of them are doing who can't find work, they're turning to social media and content creation. So they're becoming basically, I guess, influencers or giving out advice on the finance industry. So one analyst tells Bloomberg, it's not easy. He's been out of work since about 2022. He's 37. And this is all he's been able to find. So he's kind of growing it. His 5-figure income is about a third of what he used to earn. But he says he's trying. But it really gets into how equity research is being squeezed down to.
The heart of it quickly here, because I want to get to the other story here. On Apple, there are 56 and 4. There are 60 analysts on the A&R screen. Do I need 60 opinions on Apple?
I'm guessing 8 to 10 are getting paid for their Apple research. That's it. That's why we created Bloomberg Intelligence 15 years ago, because the street was downsizing its research commitment, and so Bloomberg decided, let's fill that void. Boom.
Thanks to Craig Moffett for being with us. A sell on Apple yesterday. One more, Lisa.
Sure. Have you ever been to Vail, Colorado?
They love me there.
They do? Okay. Have you seen the homes? Because this is about, pricey homes. Wall Street Journal says a more than 15,000 square foot home could set a price record. It's going to go on the market for $78 million. 11 bedrooms, indoor pool, 2 heated outdoor pools, 2 hot tubs, 2 kitchens, 2 elevators, a movie theater, and a gym that looks fantastic.
Paul, do they pay taxes to support the kids driving 3 hours to flip steaks?
Yeah, exactly. It's again, the real estate out there, like most resort areas in the world, it's pricing out their employees. So what Vail Resorts is doing is they have to build dorms for their employees. So
Unreal.
Anyway, it's crazy out there.
Lisa, thank you so much. There's some new newspapers today here on this day of the funeral of James Earl Carter. David Gura and Anne-Marie Horton with complete coverage here in 1 hour. From New York City, it is a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What do you say to people scared stiff in cash?
We've got an administration, presumably, that will be pro-business, lower taxes.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. A special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene at our studios in New York. Michael Barr and Lisa Mateo joining us. A change in schedule. We will be with you to 9 o'clock this morning when David Gura and Anne-Marie Horton will have our coverage of the funeral of James Earl Carter, this at the Washington National Cathedral. I believe Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons to attend later on in the morning. Thank you to Richard Haass for terrific perspective in the last hour. We've got a very busy first interview here. Paul requested this. We're going to have our first interview on property and casualty insurance.
Yes.
After and still what we observe in Los Angeles.
This is going to be, just from the insurance perspective, a significant event for the insurers out there for all these homes.
Does this knock itself back to Hamilton, Bermuda, and the reinsurers? It's got to.
I think so. And Matt Palazzolo, he covers all the property and casualty insurers for Bloomberg Intelligence. He's out with some research today, trying to estimate what the costs are going to be. We'll have him in studio.
David Gura to be with us in moments. First, from the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Yeah, and a pretty quiet morning of futures before all activity in the U.S. stock market. It stops for the funeral of former President Jimmy Carter today. We have NASDAQ futures down about 0.2%, 49 points. Dow futures little changed, down about 17. S&P futures down about 0.1% or 9 points. The bond market closes early, 2 p.m. Wall Street time. Meanwhile, the 2-year yield 4.26%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.64%, down 4 basis points. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.1%. And I have to point out the pound. It slumped below 123. Its weakest level against the dollar since November of 2023. Right now, the British pound down about 0.5% at 122.93 against the dollar. And chip stocks, they could be under pressure when trading picks up back again tomorrow. Sources saying President Joe Biden plans to further limit AI chip exports. After the bell yesterday, shares of NVIDIA dropped more than 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, this special edition of the show. It's brought to you by Cohn Resnick, Advisory Assurance Tax for 4 straight years. Hedge Week has named Cohn Resnick Audit Firm of the Year. Let Cohn Resnick's financial services team show you why. Thank you, Cohn Resnick, for foundational support. The National Cathedral is an Episcopal church, but with a heritage, and particularly in the modern age, of being ecumenical in nature. A devout Baptist will have a service there today, and with perspective is David Gura in Washington. The tributes, David Gura, how appropriate to see Andrew Young of Jimmy Carter's Georgia give the homily.
Yes, I'll be listening raptly to hear that, as will those who are gathered in that cathedral today. And kind of fascinatingly as well, there are 2 eulogies that will be delivered by the grandchildren of Walter Mondale and Gerald Ford. These were eulogies that were prepared many years ago, and of course they both left us. So those grandsons were alerted to the fact that those eulogies had been written and were scheduled to be prepared just a few days ago. These funerals, as you know, Tom, have a way of kind of capturing the attention, yes, of the nation, but of this city as well. The flags are at half-mast, all the federal agencies are closed, and the roads are as well. So in less than an hour, at 9 o'clock Wall Street time, we'll see a movement from the Capitol, where Jimmy Carter has been lying in state in the Capitol Rotunda, to the National Cathedral on the other side of town, and that service will begin at about 10 o'clock.
You, of course, you had your Gensler interview yesterday, but you've been a student of this, and of course you go to what's considered the Foundation Edition, which is John Alter's book on President Carter. David Gura, what have you learned new about Jimmy Carter?
I've learned a lot about him as a politician. I think there's a tendency to dismiss his political acumen. Of course, he only served one term, and I think there was a great frustration among Democrats about the way that he operated when he was in the White House. But something that Jonathan Alter lays bare in that book, and others have as well, is what savvy it took for him to get to the White House in the first place. He was a one-term governor who definitely gave thought to the prospect of running for president, but wasn't something that he embraced with gusto until Secretary of State to President Kennedy and President Johnson came down, Dean Rusk, and suggested that he make the run for it. And he found a path forward and really approached that with great zeal. He doggedly crisscrossed the country 5 days a week, returning to planes every weekend. But he found a way to do this and to assemble this coalition and to fashion himself as this kind of new Democrat. And I think that fundamentally is the legacy that he leaves, his ability to do that. And of course, things didn't fall apart completely, but changed dramatically when he left the White House after one term.
David, and of course, a large part of President Carter's legacy is his post-presidential years. How do you think they should be remembered?
I mean, they're impressive by any measure. The work that he did around the world on voting rights and the security of elections, and of course, building homes for poor people across this country and around the world. I was looking through the program for the Order of Service for this morning at the National Cathedral, and Garth Brooks and Tricia Yearwood are going to perform at that service. They have closely worked with the Carters over the years, building homes with Habitat for Humanity. So he's somebody who left the White House, returned to Georgia, took stock of what he might do, and of course there were the prospects of going into academia, running a university perhaps. He brokered this arrangement with Emory University to start the Carter Center, and really worked as this kind of de facto diplomat going around the world, doing good work and good deeds, building homes, working on public health, and I think that's a legacy that stands large and will certainly be appreciated by everyone today.
One final question, David Gura. The 39th President of the United States did what we all did. He had a radio in his bedroom, in his case, a battery radio in an impoverished, still almost Reconstruction New South, and he listened to Bill Monroe. David Gura on bluegrass and the president.
This is something that's also such a fascinating thread of his life, certainly his presidency, but more than that, his affection for music and the way that he worked with musicians, yes, in the South, but across the country, and really saw the White House as a platform for elevating American culture, bluegrass included. He had Bill Monroe come to the White House with Doc Watson. It's a wonderful concert that you can watch online. But he's somebody who had a deep affection for music. At the Naval Academy, he listened to opera. He knew classical music very well. Got into jazz, got into bluegrass, got into rock, Southern rock especially, and was somebody who really appreciated sort of all facets of American culture, and really saw his role as president, yes, to make great gains on foreign policy and domestic policy, but to elevate American culture as well, Tom.
David Gura and Anne Marie Horton, within the hour, the services for James Earl Carter. Paul mentioned this earlier. Only Paul can do this. He knows that we have a genius in the building. Mm-hmm. What do you do? Do you 1-800 nationwide? What do you do in LA right now?
I don't know. I mean, it's the people, the number of structures that have been destroyed, people's homes, people's businesses. I mean, the video that we're all seeing and we're all witnessing coming in, a lot of it from the networks, a lot of it from folks just posting on social media. We're seeing just devastation there in terms of just neighborhoods, just in general, beautiful homes, beautiful businesses being burnt to the ground. Obviously, there's a business aspect, a cost associated with that, and one of the ways to express that financial cost, that economic cost, is through insurance losses. Matt Palazzola joins us. He covers the property and casualty insurers for Bloomberg Intelligence. We often talk to Matt when there are natural disasters, whether it's hurricanes or earthquakes, and kind of what are the costs associated with that. Matt, thanks so much for joining us here. It seems like we're seeing just so much devastation of physical property in Los Angeles, high-priced properties. What are some of the numbers? How are they kind of adding up at the early stage here?
Yeah, Paul. So definitely acknowledging this is people's homes, people's lives, but my job is to look at it from this economic insurance perspective. We ran a scenario analysis last night, this morning, with a low end on the insured losses of about $4 billion. Higher end over 10, maybe could be 13, could be even higher, really depending. What caught me off guard was the amount of structures destroyed so quickly. So the reports are coming out that there was like 1,000 structures destroyed with zero containment of the fire. That's, historically speaking, that's
right.
Like half of a major event already.
Were they insured?
I mean, I don't know exactly,
you don't know.
But
right.
We just get structures, right? And that was probably mostly homes. Most of the homes are going to have some kind of insurance. It's not necessarily like a flood, hurricane situation where the coverage is iffy. It is generally fire as a covered peril.
Your tendency is to believe that Paris Hilton's home was insured.
Yeah, I don't know about her specifically,
but yeah,
I know it.
Just a general
yeah, I mean, one thing I would say is, so these mega high-end homes, Chubb is a name that does a lot of business there. I've heard anecdotal cases where the insurance is so expensive that you might have someone say, I'm just not going to buy it for my $15 million house or something, but that might be the exception more than the rule.
So, I mean, what I think we've all learned with all these natural disasters over the year, particularly hurricanes in Florida and on the Gulf Coast, is that some of that stuff is just not insured.
Right.
And flooding, not insured in some cases. Fire generally is insured. Is that kind of the way we should think about it? There's a higher level of fire insurance versus maybe hurricane, flooding, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, fire is going to be more of a covered peril across the board. So like we had the hurricanes in Florida, Hurricane Helene and Milton, like there was a lot of flooding there, and you'd see the economic loss be, many multiples of the insured loss. Here you'll still see that dynamic of when you hear a large economic loss number, the insured might be much smaller, but as a percentage, more will be insured.
What did we learn from the horrific Maui fires? I mean, it's not funny, but it was a precursor to this devastation. Did your industry learn something from that?
I'm going to say probably not a ton. The problems in the markets are unique. So like Florida is different from California.
So what's California like?
So in California, and what you're going to see, I'm seeing a lot on social media, is, oh my goodness, State Farm was canceling policies like months and weeks before this, things like that. What is happening in California is this wildfire risk coupled with regulatory risk. So the home insurers in the state are saying, we're not getting adequate pricing for the risk we're taking. The state is saying, yeah, we're not going to let you basically get adequate pricing. So a lot of the private companies are pulling out.
So who is it, like Florida, where the government is insuring in some way?
Exactly. So there's a FAIR plan in Florida, in California, which the insurers contribute to, and that is kind of this insurer of last resort.
It's a reinsurance package in Sacramento.
It's an insurance package that buys separate reinsurance. So it is basically insurance through the government, partially funded by companies in the state.
Well, I owned a home in Northern California for many years, and it was hard to get insurance for fire, but we were able to. But we then, probably 5 years ago, those insurers pulled out, so we had to go to Lloyd's of London. These are the people that insure like cargo ships going through war zones. That's where we had to go.
So I know, Matt, you were on the phone with Mr. Buffet last night, but the answer is, in the Warren Buffett reinsurance world, you should see Matt Palazzola in shorts in Hamilton, Bermuda with knee socks.
I can
looks
imagine.
like a piece of work.
Every weekend.
What does this mean for the reinsurers, the Hamilton, Bermudas, the Lloyd's of London people?
So this loss, should it get to 8, 9, 10 plus billion, it will impact the reinsurance industry. I'm not going to say it's probably not a major loss for reinsurers, probably not for Buffett either. It will be, I think our takeaway was, this can be a sizable industry loss. Like Hurricane Helene, the best estimate of that was like 11 billion. So,
what do you say about the $50 billion statistic out on social media from people completely unqualified?
So, I had referenced economic versus insured earlier, and I think that's the number you're hearing is economic. So they're including a whole host of things that may not be insured. So I'm really looking at like properties.
So if somebody has a small abode, what, $3 million, $4 million?
Yep.
They have a $3 million and $4 million property, 6 houses down and 2 streets back from Billy Crystal. Are they going to be fully covered?
I mean, they should be, yeah. I mean, the The one thing I'd
Very
say,
cool.
the caveat is, as you were saying, Paul, in California, when you have this risk, they might carve it out. They might charge you extra for a fire rider or something like that. So I can't.
For the new policy.
Yeah, I mean, so I can't say, look, everyone's going to be covered. The blanket statement I would say is, it's more likely you're covered for fire than flood, and
you said that
with the caveat of they know it's a wildfire risk, and could there be some loophole where you didn't fireproof something or whatever? Like, there could be some things like that. You'll probably hear things like that, but generally more covered.
All right, so you mentioned Chubb, Allstate, Travelers. Are those the three companies that have exposure in California for this?
Yeah, I mean, among our coverage and public companies, yes. The fair plan, like we talked about, is going to take losses, which can translate to the reinsurance market. Right. And there's mutual companies, which is like State Farm, Liberty Mutual. Like those are the bigger, actually the bigger insurers in the state, and they're not public. They don't have stock.
Talk to our audience, listening and watching on YouTube, about the reality that all insurances, car, P&C, they're all going up way more than inflation. Does that continue into 2026?
So separate markets, I would say home, yes. Auto, we're looking at probably some competition starting there. One thing auto insurance companies love to do besides put ads on TV is compete away excess profits. And for the auto insurance industry, or the auto insurance line of business, we're starting to get into that. We're in that excess profit situation. So you're starting to see them advertise more. You'll probably see price competition, I'm thinking, probably midway through 25. So I think there might be some relief there. I wouldn't expect you to just sit there and see your auto premiums go down. You probably have to shop it around. I think there's some relief there. Home, especially with events like this, I don't think those are abiding anytime soon. And then on the commercial side, prices are going down there too.
Matt, don't be a stranger. I learned a lot. This was great. Very good. Matt Pellizzolo with Bloomberg Intelligence with us today. We welcome you on this special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance, truncated today. We will end at 8:59 here in about 45 minutes, and then David Gura and Anne-Marie Horton from Washington, from our studios in Washington, services for the 39th President of the United States, James Earl Carter, that at the Washington National Cathedral. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Los Angeles wildfires driven by hurricane-strength wind gusts continue to tear through neighborhoods, killing at least 5 people and forced more than 100,000 residents to flee. Los Angeles County Fire Chief Anthony Marone acknowledged this is more than his staff can handle on their own.
We're doing the very best we can, but no, we don't have enough fire personnel in LA County between all of the departments to handle this.
Firefighters from Northern California and out of state are coming in to assist. Meanwhile, as he left a meeting on Capitol Hill with senators, President-elect Trump was asked about helping California recover from the fires.
The governor has not done a good job. With that being said, I got along well with him when he was governor. We worked together very well, and we would work together. I guess it looks like we're going to be the one having to rebuild it.
Former President Jimmy Carter will be honored today with a state funeral in the nation's capital. Brown University political science professor Wendy Schiller says there are lessons to be learned from Jimmy Carter's presidency.
You need, management skills. You need to have a good relationship with Congress. You need to have those things. And Jimmy Carter came in as an accomplished politician from Georgia, governor of Georgia, similar parallels to Bill Clinton in a lot of ways, but had a Congress that didn't necessarily want to do what he wanted to do, particularly on things like environment, energy, alternative fuels, sort of more human rights in foreign policy as opposed to being sort of defense hawks.
Brown University political scientist Wendy Schiller. The Ukraine Defense Contract Group, including representatives from the U.S., Germany, and Ukraine, met today in Ramstein, Germany. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says support for Ukraine must continue.
In February, we will mark 3 years of Putin's war, and the stakes are still enormous for all of our security. If Putin swallows Ukraine, his appetite will only grow.
Secretary Lloyd Austin confirmed $500 million in U.S. military assistance to Ukraine. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with the Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
really stunned at the YouTube audience this morning. Thank you so much for tuning in here on this special effort. Paul, I mean, I'm going to tear up here. It's me. Thank you for being in today, Michael Barr and Lisa Mateo.
Sure.
They don't say thank you to you and me.
No, we know who the stars are.
But, yep. Barr comes in. Can we just take 30 seconds here? I've been waiting for Thursday to talk about this weekend's football. It's exciting.
Well, you know what? Now, there might be a problem here because the Wildfires out there, because there's the Rams game at SoFi. That might be moved. Well, it might be moved to Phoenix.
Yeah, that's what I heard the reporting. Yeah. So make that decision.
Yeah, I saw that in the Zeitgeist last.
They've already postponed, I think, a couple basketball, hockey.
We have college today.
Yep.
You've been talking to Dan Ives this morning. This is a huge deal. Penn State, Notre Dame.
Yeah, Dan Ives. I just reached out to him this morning. He is there. He's obviously a big Penn State supporter, graduate. He's there and ready to go.
Detroit earned a bye. They don't play this weekend.
They do not play,
and that's a big deal, right?
Yes, we need to heal.
We need to heal.
This is 2 critical weeks for us to heal. And
it's not like baseball where you listen to Justin Verlander of the San Francisco Giants. Did you see that?
Yes, I did.
Giants, Tigers, May or June, that's going to be a hell of a game. Justin Verlander of the San Francisco Giants. Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures lower. This is before the U.S. stock market closes for a national day of mourning for former President Jimmy Carter. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, 48 points. Dow futures little changed, down about 26 points, and S&P futures down 0.1% or 10 points. Treasuries in a 4-day sell-off. The bond market closes at 2 p.m. Wall Street time today. The 2-year yield 4.26%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.66%. That's down 3 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude $76 a barrel, WTI crude $73 a barrel. We have spot gold $2,675 an ounce, and the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little changed. A merger in the retail world. JCPenney joined up with Spark Group. That's the owner of fashion brands like Aeropostale, Forever 21. They're going to form a new company called Catalyst Brands. And the Dutch government says NVIDIA, AMD, they're in talks with the Netherlands regarding support of the construction of an AI facility over there. And then finally, sources say former Google CEO Eric Schmidt made a significant investment. It's a 3D rocket maker called Relativity Space. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Thank you so much for joining us today across the nation on your commute. A particular good morning to those beleaguered on the West Coast, in the greater Los Angeles area, as Lisa Mateo said, and too many in Airbnbs unscheduled. We say early good morning to California. On YouTube, thank you so much for joining us worldwide here on this day of services for James Earl Carter, 39th President of the United States. I want to go narrow here, and that's the magic of Wendy Schiller with her definitive textbooks on American civics. I want Wendy Schiller of Brown University folks to describe what I lived and viscerally lived in going from the debacle of a war in Vietnam, in a war at the Watergate Hotel, to where we were in 72, 73, 1974. And I remember, Wendy Schiller, crystal clear, on November 20th, 1975, when Midge Costanza of Rochester, who ended up in the Carter administration, because she was the first one on board in the North with some unknown from Georgia. Explain what Jimmy Carter and the nation faced after Vietnam, after Watergate.
Well, Tom, I mean, you're pointing to probably the most difficult time for trust in government that, you know, the sort of modern American political system had known, right? So we know that FDR hid some things like his physical well-being, but he had fireside chats and people felt connected to the president. They trusted the president. They believed in the president. And Eisenhower, too, also capitalized that, of course, the Kennedy mystique. So Johnson's the first person who really runs into trouble about government transparency and Vietnam after having such huge successes with getting the Civil Rights Act and a lot of social welfare policy, Medicare, Medicaid, things that we really rely on today. So in that sense, you know, flash forward 10 years later after the Kennedy's assassinated and the Johnson administration runs into trouble in Vietnam, there's just a really sour mood in the United States about the federal government and about politics in general. And at the same time, it's running head on into social movements that are transformative. Certainly the women's rights movement, certainly anti-war movement. You're starting to see the gay rights movement. So Jimmy Carter comes along sort of and sees a window. First, he's elected governor in 1970, I believe, in Georgia, reelected, and then says a window for the Democratic Party to leave that behind and meld the Southern strength of Democrats, which are still voting for the Democratic Party, the Southern strength of Democrats, with a new vision of where America could go.
Right,
and I think that's what he sold.
Brilliant. But Professor Schiller, as E.J. Dionne brilliantly describes in the Washington Post this morning, Carter couldn't get through the window after he took the Dixiecrats' vote in his election, and he ended up with a Reagan landslide. What did he do wrong in his administration to lose the working class?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot there, right? I mean, you also see sort of the South starting to come to terms with civil rights. And you start to see a peel away of white conservative Democratic voters sort of being more attracted to the Republican Party and having to adjust to enforcement for civil rights, which just had not happened. So, you know, you pass these laws in the 60s, but you don't really start to enforce until the Carter administration. And that Carter Justice Department did administer and try to enforce civil rights. So he starts to erode that, at least in the South. The base that he won with in 76 wasn't available in 1980 to the same extent. He also picked fights with members of Congress, huge Democratic majorities. I think we can't even imagine it today, people who know modern politics, to think about having a 70 or 100 seat margin in the House of Representatives for a party. But that's what the Democrats had. And a lot of it rested on the South. And Jimmy Carter sort of picked fights with individual leaders from the South on energy policy, for example, Robert Byrd in the Senate from West Virginia. And he just kept doing it over. So he lost them at the same time he was losing their base voters. And they started to get concerned, as well they should, that they were going to go down in 1980 with Carter. And that's exactly what happened in the Senate. The Democrats lost a number of seats because of Jimmy Carter's defeat.
Wendy, this funeral comes at a time of presidential transition. We saw a major shift when President Reagan took over from President Carter. Do you think we're in for a repeat in less than 2 weeks' time here?
Well, I mean, you know, in some ways Reagan shifted, but in others he didn't. In Carter's last year of the presidency, he raised the defense budget by, you know, maybe $100 million or something. It's nothing in today's numbers, but it was a lot then. So he was already reinvesting in the military, Jimmy Carter. He also established things like federal support for alternative energy, solar energy, for example. That's still, Biden did the same thing. So there are things that he did, federal government's role in housing, for example, that are still very much a part of the federal government. So when a new president comes in, how much can they undo from the prior administration? So Trump's coming in again. He tried to undo Obamacare. It is more firmly entrenched than it was when he came in 2017. I don't think that's a starter. It's a non-starter for him now. So how much can he undo that's sort of embedded in the federal structure? And when he talks about the federal government and how inefficient it is, it may be possible to reform that, but that's not like tackling Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Those are very difficult programs to transform, even for a new president with presidential powers.
Well, on the granularity yesterday, Republicans, including Thune of the Dakotas, meeting with the president. And I think the reported summary from Billy Haass is the meeting went nowhere. Am I right on that, Professor Schiller?
Well, I think Trump knows he's getting a sense, or he already has a sense of when he can wade into a battle and win. And he got defeated when he waded into the budget battle a couple of weeks ago. And in some ways, he got a little bit sort of tarnished in the Mike Johnson speaker fight. It ended up okay, but it wasn't smooth. And he doesn't want to have any losses on his record when he's about to be inaugurated again. He wants to be a winner. So he looks at that and says, you work it out. And what's concerning for the Republicans is it's unclear what the relationship is between Thune in the Senate and Mike Johnson in the House. Right? Thune can bring things to the table and get them through the Senate with the help of Murkowski and Collins, depending on how extreme right they are. But in the House, Johnson can make no promises to John Thune. None. Zero. He has no negotiating authority on what he knows he can pass. That's a very precarious situation. And Trump, I guess, he's either being told or reads it himself. I don't want to get into that. I don't want to get that loss, another loss. I don't want to be dependent on the House of Representatives for the sort of glow of my first couple of months as president again.
Wendy, a civics lesson to say the least. Professor Schiller, thank you so much on this day of a presidential funeral. Wendy Schiller of Brown University. Chart of the day, and it goes back to Jordan Rochester, Paul Sweeney. I retweeted it out, and it's Robin Brooks, always, of Brookings. I mean, Robin Brooks is just brilliant. Huge value add. It's amazing how all the bond markets are sort of kind of like ugly, price down, yield up.
Yep.
And how separate the United Kingdom is.
Yeah.
I think I don't, folks. I don't know. And I think in America, we don't know just how fragile it is there.
Yeah, and it's kind of took me a little bit by surprise here, but you know, the pound has dropped more than to more than a 1-year low. Stocks falling, gilts extend their 4th day of losses. So it's just some real uncertainty there about the economic, I think the near-term economic outlook for the UK.
Do you know, I didn't know what a gilt was for years. People would say gilt, and I'd sit there and go, oh, that sounds
and cable,
impressive.
That's another one.
Cable I get.
Okay.
Because it's like loony. Lisa Mateo in the loony quote.
Yep.
Like you quote Canada 2 different ways. You quote loony, and if you flip the fraction, the pair, I call that the tourist dollar. Because that's how they think about it in Niagara Falls.
Right.
But cable is cable, which is pound per dollar.
Okay.
This is way too much lifting.
I've never been to Niagara Falls.
You've never been to Niagara Falls?
All right.
I put out a tweet last night in defense of Mark Carney and all of Canada. Niagara Falls is more beautiful from the Canadian side.
Okay.
Oh, it is. It is.
My parents, they ponied up. We couldn't afford it. The Sheraton Hotel with the lights at night, and we could stay up late. Lisa, you know. Did you ever go on the boat, Lisa? I could see you.
I didn't go on the boat with the raincoats and everything.
Yeah,
no, we didn't do that.
They would let me.
That's on the bucket list.
My father would say, if you don't empty the dishwasher, you're going over the Niagara Falls like Sam Patch. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Canada and Western New York. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures. This is ahead of Jobs Day tomorrow. This morning, though, we did receive some more data on the labor market. Challenger Grain Christmas says job cuts rose 11.4% year over year in December. 38,792 layoffs. Auto companies had a 43.2% increase from last year. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.1%, 32 points. Dow futures, little change, down 7 points. S&P futures down about 0.1% or down 6 points. Keep in mind that we will have the stock market close. That's in less than an hour from now. That's when we will pay tribute to the life of Jimmy Carter. Treasuries on the rise. The bond market closes at 2 p.m. Wall Street time. So let's get to the 2-year yield, 4.25%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.65%, and that's down 4 basis points. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. And we have Bitcoin down about 2% at just over 92,000. Few companies making news. That's UBS. Sources telling the Wall Street Journal it's set to pay at least hundreds of millions of dollars. It's to settle violations by Credit Suisse. And Jefferies, quarterly profit more than tripled on M&A rebound, also surge in equity trading revenue. And finally, Meta saying it's going to allow some Facebook users to view eBay listings on its marketplace service. It's trying to resolve that EU charge of illegally shutting out competition. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. No economic data today. I guess we had Challenger came out. That's a private survey. But tomorrow, Paul Sweeney and I will go beneath the headline data at 8:30, and we do that with our economic indicators. And always our economic indicators brought to you by Cohn Resnick, Advisory Assurance Tax. Discover game-changing strategies to maximize value, optimize performance, and manage risk. Put your business at the forefront. In my ute, the San Gabriel Mountains north of LA were basically invisible in the pollution, like Mexico City of LA. And one of the miracles of this nation, including the work of President Carter, was crystal clear St. Gabriel Mountains. This is up buttressed with El Tadina, and this has been one of the 2 major fires that we've seen the last couple days. And if you migrate from El Tadina southwest across Lake Avenue, beneath Lincoln Avenue, you run into Pasadena. And Paul, this is where Ohio State wins every year in the Rose Bowl. It
seems like
they win that's the way it is. It's 4.5 miles, a short distance to the Rose Bowl from this horrific fire. We would speak to James Glassman of JPMorgan, now retired in his glory, about this job economy. He is definitive with his work at Northwestern, but we must speak to him about what he's witnessed the last couple of days. Jim Glassman, where you are a distance from the Altadena fires, do you have smoke damage?
Yeah, you don't want to look at the air quality index, which is normally good, is 30 to 50. It was 325 yesterday. They call it unhealthy. It's very thick. It reminds me, actually, what you were saying reminds me, I lived here when I was in first grade long ago, and it looks just like I remember. You couldn't see the mountains.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't see that. Jim Glassman, just one more question on this. Do you have a sense within the Glassman zeitgeist of Los Angeles that it's all clear this morning, or are people still steeled for more winds and fire?
Well, I think the winds seem to have settled down, but the fire is going to take some time to get a grip. When I looked at the review of all the different fires, they said that none of it was under control, really.
Right.
We've been kind of looking to see when that's going to happen, but it's going to take a while. It's pretty devastating. And, normally these stories are kind of remote to all of us. We know there's an issue going on somewhere, and we calculate what is this going to do to the economy. This is a real personal thing for me because people had to, I've got people living in my house because they had to vacate from Brentwood and Palisades. They know half the, large community been disrupted.
Right.
No home, nothing to live in.
Dr.
It's going to take a little while.
To turn to the economy, and with your brilliant work, particularly on teenage unemployment years ago, are we a fully employed America?
I think we could be more fully employed. I think we were prior to the pandemic, and then we kind of got back there. It's loosened up a little bit, but I think the problem really in the labor market, it's not so much We are, by the standard metrics, we're fully employed. But the problem really in America is that the share of income that goes to the various things that we use to produce GDP, workers have been getting a smaller share. And this has been going on since the late 1990s. And I think if you keep an eye on the evolution of what's going on in the labor market, the politics makes a little more sense. The disruption that's going on in the labor market's been really stunning. And that's kind of, to me, what this shrinking share of income going to workers has meant. And it's got massive implications for all kinds of things. And by the way, we grew up in school. I grew up learning that, keep your eye on, are we fully employed or not? And that's going to tell you whether there's inflation danger. What we're learning in this millennium, the last 25 years, we're learning that story doesn't really make sense. A tight labor market is not really the danger for inflation. And I think the Fed people have been slowly abandoning that view, as you hear from Jay Powell.
And that's kind of where I want to go, Jim, just kind of the concern about inflation here. Are we at a new normal here where maybe that 2% number that the Fed wants isn't really where we need to be?
Well, I've heard Janet Yellen once say, you know what, if we could do it all over again, maybe we would have picked a different target. Because, but I think the problem is once you decide, all the central banks around the world, started with Bank of New Zealand, once they embrace the idea that they should have an explicit target, 2%, the market bought it. And it's reflected in inflation expectations, and it's really been anchored. It's an important anchor for the bond market. I think I don't hear anymore people worrying about what's the long-run strategy of the central bank. That we used to think about that all the time, the politics of central bank, of the monetary policy. And I think the advantage of picking some number, whatever it is, we could quarrel about whether 2 is too low. But I think once you do it, it's unwise to changing the rules of the game.
Jim Glassman, thank you so much for joining us. Too short an interview on the economy at hand. Thank you for that perspective on your Rose Bowl in Southern California and Los Angeles as well. Right to it with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Let's begin with those out-of-control wildfires in California. They've turned deadly with little relief in sight. Let's get the very latest with Bloomberg's John Tucker.
Michael, this is Los Angeles. The crackle of flames and the boom of random explosions are heard as the wildfires continue plaguing at least 5 areas. The toll is staggering. More than 100,000 forced to evacuate, hundreds of homes and businesses reduced to ash, and at least 5 dead. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass.
And I definitely want to send my condolences to the families who lost loved ones, to the families and neighborhoods who lost property.
LA Fire Captain Eric Scott says they're struggling to maintain resources.
We are asking for help. This is significantly trying. We do want more firefighters.
The wildfires are fueled by dry conditions and a rare wind event. Gusts up to 100 miles per hour in a region that has seen less than 0.2 of an inch of rain since last spring. And another windstorm could follow next week with no rain in between. AccuWeather estimates damages and economic losses up to $57 billion, saying it could become the worst wildfire incident in California history. I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
A state funeral for former President Jimmy Carter at Washington National Cathedral is later this morning. We'll broadcast it live right here on Bloomberg. Terry Haynes, founder of Pangea Policy, says Carter lived a useful life with the Carter Center, Habitat for Humanity, and more.
The markets particularly have Jimmy Carter to thank for today's market strength, because it was Carter's determination to break U.S. inflation, including by appointing Paul Volcker, the Fed chair, and sticking with it, that really created the economy and the United States prosperity that we all enjoy today.
Terry Haynes of Pangea Policy. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
There we go, the Detroit Lions button. It is Detroit Lions blue, we should point out as well. In this special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance, we come up at 8:49 Wall Street time to the funeral of the former president. David Gura and Anne-Marie Horton will give you coverage at 9 a.m. On that. Paul Sweeney and I will step aside. We'll be with you tomorrow for the jobs report. Paul, what's the number? Like it's a 160-ish and...
Yeah, 165. The whispers of 185, Tom.
It's a higher number.
Yeah, Bloomberg Economics even has a higher number than that.
Interesting. The uncertainty of the jobs report tomorrow. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene, this special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. We are 6 minutes away from David Gura and Anne-Marie Horton's coverage in Washington of the funeral services for James Earl Carter. We're starting to see in the feed. All right, give me the feed up here on YouTube. On Bloomberg Radio, the key element to the feed is it is a very frigid day in Washington. It's in the 20s, but don't tell that to people with a stiff breeze going on as well. It is going to be a cold and frigid January morning, bright, clear, and sunny in Washington for the service at the National Cathedral. We had a number of options here, including going to Anne-Marie Horton, but we really thought with the interest that we've seen across the nation on your commute and also what we see on YouTube, that we would like more intelligent discussion of the fire and the view forward. Rob Carolyn has been kind enough to rejoin us with his wonderful coverage. Rob Carolyn, if I look at a U.S. drought monitor, a big fancy map, California is not very droughty. The other droughts are in Utah, up to Montana, into the western Dakotas, and of course, always down in New Mexico, the Rio Grande Valley. There's even drought in southern New Jersey, of all places. I mean, are there other parts of America that could witness this horror that we've seen?
Not really, Tom. The interesting thing with Southern California and Northern California is not only the fact that they get dry, being so close to the ocean, but the topography, that you have these, fairly decent-sized mountain ranges right along the immediate coast. And anytime we get these offshore winds, that's winds that are east, northeast, north-northeast, they get funneled through the canyons, which are particularly found across Southern California, which increases the speeds. Yesterday, we saw sustained winds of 30 to 40 miles an hour, but through some of those canyons, yesterday and the night before, we were seeing gusts over 100 miles an hour because of the funneling effect with those winds, and that is particular to Southern California.
So to be clear here, folks, it's not the Altadena-Pasadena fire, it's the Eaton Canyon fire. Is that right, Rob Carolyn?
Exactly, and the Pacific Palisades fire on the west side of a mountain, the wind over the mountain, Tom, as it goes down in elevation, it warms because the air is being compressed, it dries out, so the humidity falls, and it ends up causing, just unbelievable damage in such a short period of time.
And Rob, what's over the next 24, 48 hours, the forecast for those winds?
Well, Paul, the winds are relatively calm right now. The highest winds we're seeing are out in San Bernardino, where it's gusting over 30 miles an hour. Right now, LAX is reporting a wind of 4 miles an hour. I'm not seeing many gusts over 10 miles an hour right in the immediate LA area. Once we pop the inversion, once temperatures start to warm up from the 40s this morning, the winds will pick up. They'll start gusting above 35 and 40 miles an hour in the Los Angeles area. Then through the afternoon, Paul, those strong winds shift southward towards San Diego and increase, passing through some of the passes in the mountains to the east of San San Diego. We could see some gusts later today over 70 miles an hour. The fire danger threat will spread from Los Angeles County and Orange County on into San Diego County later this afternoon and tonight. Then it looks like by Saturday, the entire southern portion of California should see light and variable winds and increased humidity.
One final quick question, Rob Carolyn. In all your years of doing this, how does this level up with other fires, infernos that you've seen?
This is as bad as the fires in the late 80s in the San Francisco area, Tom, because we had the combination yesterday and Monday of an area of low pressure departing the region, which caused strong winds. That was being followed by a cold front dropping down from the north and west, which really squeezed the atmosphere and caused just really tremendous winds. To see gusts over 100 miles an hour through some of those canyons yesterday afternoon, that's something that's very rare. It does not happen very often.
Rob, thank you so much for all of us at Bloomberg Radio and on YouTube worldwide for the balanced, the clear, the knowledgeable coverage. Rob Carolyn is surveillance meteorologist. The president's funeral, David Gurr and Anne Marie Horton will have that for you here in a frigid Washington. Paul Sweeney and I thank you for your many comments. This has been a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance, and we must say we'll be here tomorrow with complete coverage of the American labor economy. We now turn to Washington, D.C. and a funeral.